Imagine a world where great power and great responsibility met, where the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man wasn't just protecting Queens, but protecting an entire species from extinction. This isn't the story you know. This isn't about joining a team of heroes. This is about joining a family of outcasts. This is Peter's true home. Let's spin the web that could have been. It started with a choice, but this time, it wasn't about Uncle Ben. The Midtown High field trip to Oscorp had gone exactly as planned, until it didn't. The radioactive spider bit Peter Parker, just like always. But when he stumbled out of that lab, when the world started spinning with new senses and impossible strength, when he looked up to see his classmates staring at him with a mixture of fear and disgust, something was different.
Freak! What the hell are you?
Flash Thompson shouted, backing away from Peter as his friend clung to the ceiling in panic. The word hit harder than any punch Flash had ever thrown. Freak. The same word he'd heard whispered about on the news. The same word that made his Aunt May change the channel whenever reports about the X-Men came on. Peter's enhanced hearing picked up every whisper.
Is he one of them? A mutant? Someone call the authorities.
But instead of authorities, someone else arrived. Professor Charles Xavier stepped into the hallway, his wheelchair moving with quiet dignity past the crowd of terrified students. Behind him stood a woman with white hair and dark skin, her eyes crackling with barely contained lightning.
Hello, Peter. My name is Charles Xavier. I believe you and I need to talk.
Xavier said, his voice calm and kind. Peter's spider sense wasn't screaming danger. Instead, it was humming with something else entirely. Recognition.
You're not alone, young man, and you don't have to be afraid.
Storm said, her voice carrying the authority of thunder. For the first time since the spider bite, Peter Parker felt like he could breathe. The ride to Westchester was silent, but not empty. Professor Xavier didn't probe Peter's mind. He'd made that clear from the start. But Peter could feel something else: acceptance, understanding. The quiet knowledge that the man beside him had seen this fear before.
The spider that bit you, was it radioactive?
Xavier said finally. Peter nodded, still not quite believing he was having this conversation. They passed through the gates of Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, just as the sun was setting. Students moved across the grounds, some walking, some floating, one literally running through walls like they weren't there.
This is a sanctuary, a place where young people like yourself can learn to control their gifts without fear of persecution. A place where being different isn't just accepted, it's celebrated.
Peter watched a girl with red hair lift a truck with her mind, while another student with blue fur hung upside down from a tree, reading a book.
What if I'm not a mutant? What if I'm just a mistake?
Peter asked quietly. Xavier stopped his wheelchair and turned to face Peter directly.
My boy, the method of acquisition matters far less than what you choose to do with your gifts. You have the heart of someone who wants to help others. That's not a mistake. That's a calling.
Peter's first week at Xavier's school was a revelation. Not just because of the classes on power control and ethics, but because of the students. Bobby Drake, Iceman, showed him how to create ice slides during lunch, then spent the evening helping Peter with calculus.
Math is just another kind of problem solving, and you're already great at solving problems.
Bobby said, forming ice sculptures to illustrate geometric principles. Kitty Pryde could phase through walls, but she was also the school's top computer science student. She helped Peter build his first pair of web shooters, improving the formula with suggestions from Dr. McCoy's chemistry class.
The beauty of this place is that we don't have to hide what we can do. We can push ourselves to be better,
she said, watching Peter test his web lines in the danger room. But it was Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, who really understood. Peter found him one evening on the mansion's roof, looking out over the grounds.
You're having trouble sleeping too?
Kurt asked, his tail curling around the chimney for balance.
How did you know?
The same way I know you've been crying.
Kurt said gently, his German accent softening the words.
Because I remember my first week here. The guilt, the fear, the wondering if you deserve to be happy when you're so different.
Peter sat beside him, pulling off his mask. In the moonlight, his face was young and uncertain.
Back home, they looked at me like I was a monster, even before they knew about this.
He He gestured to his costume.
I was just the weird kid who got picked on. Now I'm the weird kid with powers.
Kurt smiled, and despite his demonic appearance, it was one of the warmest expressions Peter had ever seen.
Mein Freund, do you know what I see when I look at you?
A freak.
I see someone who got incredible power and immediately thought about how to help others. You didn't seek revenge on the bullies. You didn't use your gifts for personal gain. You tried to be a hero.
Kurt's yellow eyes gleamed with conviction.
That's not freakish, Peter. That's extraordinary.
The first real test came 3 months later. The Sentinels attacked on a Tuesday morning, just as Peter was heading to his advanced physics class with Dr. McCoy. The massive robots descended from the sky like mechanical angels of death, their targeting systems locked onto every mutant signature in the school.
All students to the safe rooms. X-Men assemble.
Storm's voice boomed over the intercom, backed by the rumble of thunder. Peter started running toward the safe rooms with the other students, but something made him stop. A little girl, one of the newer students who could turn into living crystal, had tripped and fallen. A sentinel was bearing down on her, its palm cannon charging. Peter's spider sense screamed. He moved without thinking. The web line caught the sentinel's arm just as it fired, yanking the blast away from the child. Peter swung in a wide arc, his feet connecting with the robot's head with enough force to crack its optical sensors. The sentinel turned its weapons on him, but Peter was already moving. Web to the trees, wall crawling up its back, spider sense guiding him around every attack. He'd never fought anything this big before, but somehow it felt natural.
Nice work, Webhead. But you're supposed to be in the safe room.
Wolverine's voice came from behind him as the older mutant's claws tore through another sentinel's leg.
The safe room was full. Besides, this is kind of my thing.
Peter called back, dodging a massive fist. He webbed the sentinel's eyes, blinding it, then used his enhanced strength to tear into its chest panel. Sparks flew as he rewired its targeting system.
Peter, get clear.
Cyclops' voice cut through the chaos. Peter swung away just as Scott's optic blast tore through the compromised sentinel. The robot collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. As the dust settled, Peter found himself surrounded by the X-Men. Cyclops, Storm, Wolverine, and Beast all stared at him with expressions ranging from impressed to concerned.
That was either very brave or very stupid.
Storm said.
Why not both?
Peter replied, pulling off his mask. His hair was matted with sweat, but his eyes were bright with adrenaline.
Kid's got a point.
Wolverine snorted. Professor Xavier's voice reached them through their comlinks.
Well done, all of you. Peter, please report to my office when you're ready. I believe it's time we discussed your future here.
Xavier's office was quiet except for the soft ticking of an antique clock. Peter sat across from the professor, still in his torn costume, still processing what had just happened.
I know what you're going to say. I should have followed orders, gone to the safe room. I put everyone at risk.
Actually, I was going to ask how you felt.
Xavier interrupted gently.
How I felt.
Peter blinked.
This was your first real battle, Peter. Your first time using your abilities not just to help, but to fight. That's a significant step for any young person, but especially for one with your particular sense of responsibility.
Peter thought about it. The fear, yes, but also the exhilaration. The certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do.
It felt right. Like all the training, all the practice. It was leading up to this, to helping people who couldn't help themselves.
He said finally. Xavier smiled.
And that, my boy, is why I'd like to offer you something.
He opened a drawer and pulled out a small device, a communicator with the X-Men's logo.
The X-Men are more than just a team of superheroes, Peter. We're a family. A group of individuals who've chosen to use our gifts not just for ourselves, but for the dream of a world where mutants and humans can coexist peacefully.
Peter stared at the communicator.
But I'm not a mutant. Not really. I mean, I got my powers from a spider bite, not from genetics.
Peter, being an X-Man isn't about how you got your powers. It's about what you do with them. And today, you proved that you understand what we're fighting for.
Xavier said firmly. Peter took the communicator with shaking hands.
Does this mean...
Welcome to the X-Men, Spider-Man.
The world changed when Spider-Man joined the X-Men. Not all at once. Change never happens that way. But gradually, steadily, like a web being spun one strand at a time. The first difference was in the public perception. Spider-Man had always been viewed as a friendly neighborhood hero, someone who helped with street-level crime and saved cats from trees. When he started appearing alongside the X-Men, fighting Sentinel attacks and standing up for mutant rights, it created a cognitive dissonance.
Spider-Man isn't a mutant. So why is he working with those freaks?
J. Jonah Jameson declared on his Daily Bugle editorials. But the question backfired, because Peter Parker, with his quick wit and earnest sincerity, had an answer that resonated across the nation.
Because they're not freaks, Mr. Jameson. They're people. People with families and dreams and fears, just like everyone else. The only difference is they have abilities that make some people uncomfortable.
Peter said during a live television interview, his mask off for the first time publicly. The interviewer leaned forward.
But Spider-Man, you got your powers from a radioactive spider bite. You're not a mutant. Why do you care about mutant rights?
Peter's answer became the soundbite that changed everything.
Because with great power comes great responsibility. And I have the power to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. If I don't use that power to fight injustice, any injustice, then what's the point of having it?
Within a week, Spider-Man's right was trending globally. Young people, particularly non-mutants, began speaking out against mutant discrimination. The changes weren't just external. Within the X-Men, Peter brought something that had been missing: hope. Not that the X-Men weren't hopeful. They were fighting for Xavier's dream, after all. But Peter's optimism was different. It was infectious. Even Wolverine, gruff and cynical as he was, found himself smiling more often.
Kids got a way of making everything seem possible, even when it shouldn't be.
Logan said to Storm after watching Peter teach a group of younger students how to web swing safely. Storm nodded, watching Peter laugh as one of the kids, a mutant who could turn into living shadow, accidentally phased through a web line and ended up hanging upside down from a tree.
It's more than optimism, it's faith. Faith that people are fundamentally good, that they can change, that tomorrow can be better than today,
she said. Peter's influence on the team was most visible in their tactics. Where the X-Men had once focused primarily on defense and damage control, Peter pushed them toward more proactive community engagement.
We can't just fight the Sentinels and hope people will like us. We need to show them who we really are,
he argued during a team meeting. His proposal was simple but revolutionary: public service. Soon, the X-Men were appearing at disaster sites not just to fight villains, but to help with cleanup. Beast used his scientific knowledge to help design better emergency response systems. Storm helped areas affected by drought. Iceman assisted with forest fire containment. And Spider-Man? He did what he'd always done: helped regular people with regular problems. But now he did it as part of a team, showing the world that the X-Men weren't separate from humanity. They were part of it. The first major test of Peter's influence came when William Stryker launched his new anti-mutant campaign. The televised debates were brutal, with Stryker painting mutants as an existential threat to human civilization.
These creatures are not human. They are abominations, weapons of mass destruction walking among us. They cannot be trusted, cannot be controlled, and cannot be allowed to continue existing,
Stryker declared, his voice dripping with manufactured righteous anger. The X-Men had faced this kind of rhetoric before. Usually, Professor Xavier would respond with dignified appeals to reason and compassion. This time, Peter asked if he could take the lead.
I'm not sure that's wise, Peter. Mr. Stryker is very experienced at manipulating public opinion,
Xavier said gently.
With respect, Professor, so am I. I've been dealing with J. Jonah Jameson for years. I know how to handle bullies.
The debate was scheduled for prime time on national television. Stryker arrived with charts and statistics, prepared to deliver a presentation on the. Peter arrived with something simpler: stories.
Mr. Stryker talks about mutants like they're not people. So let me tell you about the people I know.
Peter said when given his opening statement.
These aren't weapons. These are heroes. They're teachers and students, and friends and family members who happen to have abilities that scare some people.
He told them about Bobby Drake, who used his ice powers to preserve food for homeless shelters during power outages. About Storm, who prevented droughts that would have killed thousands. About Kurt Wagner, who used his teleportation to rescue people from burning buildings. Stryker tried to interrupt with his prepared talking points, but Peter wasn't done.
And you know what? I'm scared too sometimes. When I first got my powers, I was terrified. I thought I was a freak, a mistake, something that shouldn't exist.
The camera zoomed in on Peter's face, catching the raw honesty in his expression.
The X-Men taught me something important. They taught me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be responsible for. We don't get to choose what makes us special, but we do get to choose what we do with it.
He turned to look directly at Stryker.
Mr. Stryker, you've spent your life trying to eliminate difference. But difference isn't the problem. Fear is. And the only way to fight fear is with understanding.
The debate continued for another hour, but the outcome was clear. Stryker's statistics and fear-mongering felt hollow compared to Peter's personal stories and genuine emotion. The polls showed a 15-point swing in favor of mutant rights within a week. But Peter's greatest impact on the X-Men wasn't political, it was personal. Scott Summers had always been the perfect leader. Disciplined, strategic, selfless to a fault. But he'd also been burdened by the weight of constantly being for everyone around him. Peter changed that dynamic simply by being himself.
You know you don't have to carry everything alone, right?
Peter said one evening, finding Scott on the mansion's balcony, staring out at the grounds with the weight of the world on his shoulders.
I'm the team leader.
Back when I first became Spider-Man, I thought I had to save everyone. Every crime, every accident, every problem in New York City was somehow my responsibility. Nearly killed myself trying to be everywhere at once.
Peter sat beside him. Scott turned to look at him.
What changed?
For the first time in years, Scott Summers smiled without the weight of command behind it.
When did you get so wise, Spider-Man?
The transformation wasn't limited to the team's leadership. Logan, who had spent decades as a loner, found himself becoming something he'd never expected. A mentor. It started with Peter asking questions. Not about Wolverine's past. Peter was too respectful for that. But about technique, about control, about what it meant to be a hero when you had the capacity for violence.
Kid's got claws of his own, not the metal kind. The kind that matter.
Logan said to Xavier after a particularly intense training session. Peter's influence on Logan was subtle but profound. The older mutant began spending more time with the younger students, sharing his experience without the gruff dismissiveness that had characterized his teaching before.
You remind me that not every fight has to end in blood. Sometimes I forget that.
Logan told Peter one evening after they'd successfully stopped a robbery without seriously injuring anyone.
And you remind me that sometimes fighting is necessary. Before I came here, I thought I could solve everything with jokes and weblines. You taught me that some people won't listen to reason.
Peter replied. They made an unlikely pair, the young web-slinger and the grizzled Canadian. But their partnership became one of the X-Men's most effective combinations. Jean Grey was perhaps the most affected by Peter's presence, though not in the way anyone expected. The Phoenix Force had always been Jean's burden, a cosmic power that threatened to consume her if she ever lost control. The X-Men had developed elaborate protocols for containing Phoenix episodes, but Peter approached the problem differently. He made her laugh.
So this cosmic entity of unlimited power and destruction, and it chooses to hang out with you. Must be pretty boring in space.
Peter said during one of their conversations. Jean stared at him.
Peter, the Phoenix Force could destroy entire solar systems.
Peter shot a webline to the ceiling and began performing an elaborate series of acrobatic maneuvers.
Yeah, but can it do this?
Despite herself, Jean giggled.
You're ridiculous.
I'm helpful. There's a difference.
Peter corrected. But it was more than humor. Peter's approach to Jean's struggle with the Phoenix was fundamentally different from everyone else's. Where others saw a problem to be solved, or a threat to be contained, Peter saw a person who needed support.
You know what I think? I think the Phoenix chose you not because you're strong enough to control it, but because you're kind enough to guide it,
he said during one of their training sessions. Jean paused in her meditation.
What do you mean?
Cosmic forces don't usually care about individual people, right? But you do. Maybe the Phoenix is learning compassion from you, not the other way around.
It was a simple idea, but it reframed Jean's entire relationship with her power. Instead of fighting the Phoenix, she began working with it, teaching it about humanity's capacity for love and sacrifice. The results were remarkable. Jean's control improved dramatically, and more importantly, she stopped seeing herself as a threat to the people she loved. The moment that defined Peter's true integration into the X-Men came during the Sentinel Attack on Washington, D.C. The Sentinels had evolved, their programming updated to target not just mutants, but anyone who showed. This included the growing number of human protesters who had been inspired by Spider-Man's example to stand up for mutant rights. The attack was brutal and coordinated. Dozens of massive robots descended on the Capitol while Congress was in session, debating new legislation that would have granted mutants full civil rights.
X-Men, deploy. Priority is civilian evacuation. We can't let them turn this into a massacre.
Cyclops commanded as the team arrived at the scene. But the Sentinels had learned from previous encounters. They'd adapted their tactics, using human shields and targeting escape routes to force the X-Men into impossible choices. Peter found himself separated from the team, pinned down with a group of civilians in the Lincoln Memorial. 3 Sentinels surrounded the building, their weapons charged and ready.
Scott, what's your status?
Peter said into his communicator.
Peter, what's your status?
Scott's voice crackled through the static.
Pinned down at Lincoln Memorial with about 30 civilians, 3 Sentinels, fully charged. I've got a plan, but you're not going to like it.
Peter, no.
Jean's voice joined the conversation. Peter stood up, his spider sense already screaming warnings about what he was about to do. Peter launched himself out of the memorial, directly at the lead Sentinel. But instead of his usual hit-and-run tactics, he did something unexpected. He let it grab him. The Sentinel's massive hand closed around Peter's body, lifting him toward its optical sensors for identification. But Peter had counted on this. At such close range, the robot couldn't use its heavy weapons without risking damage to its own systems.
Hey there, big guy. Want to know a secret about spiders?
Peter said, looking directly into the Sentinel's glowing eyes. He triggered every web shooter he had, flooding the Sentinel's internal systems with webbing. But these weren't ordinary web lines. Peter had modified them with a new formula, one that Jean had helped him develop using her telekinetic abilities to manipulate matter at the molecular level.
We're really good at making things stick,
Peter said, just as Storm's lightning struck. The electrical charge traveled through Peter's modified webbing directly into the Sentinel's core systems. The robot convulsed, its grip loosening, its optical systems flickering. Peter used the moment of confusion to tear free, already swinging toward the second Sentinel. But this time, he wasn't alone. Kurt appeared beside him in a puff of smoke, his teleportation allowing him to bypass the robot's defenses. Logan materialized on the Sentinel's back, his claws finding the weak points Peter had identified. Storm's winds buffeted the third robot, keeping it off balance while Jean used her telekinesis to tear away its armor plating. And Scott? Scott waited until the perfect moment, then fired a precision optic blast that took out all 3 Sentinels simultaneously. The civilians were safe, the Sentinels were down, and for the first time, Peter felt like he truly belonged.
Nice work, Webhead,
Logan said, offering him a hand up. The aftermath of the DC attack marked a turning point not just for the X-Men, but for the entire mutant rights movement. The image of Spider-Man, a non-mutant, risking his life to save both mutants and humans alike, became a symbol of unity that transcended species boundaries. But perhaps more importantly, it solidified Peter's place within the X-Men family.
You know, when I first invited you to join us, I thought we could teach you about your powers, help you control your abilities.
Xavier said to Peter a few days later. They were sitting in Xavier's office, watching the evening news coverage of the DC rescue.
But it turns out, you had something to teach us as well.
What's that, Professor?
That being a hero isn't about having powers or being part of a species. It's about choosing to use whatever gifts you have in service of others. You've reminded us all why we do this.
Xavier continued.
With great power comes great responsibility,
he said quietly.
Indeed. But Peter, I think you've discovered something even more important. With great love comes great strength. And you, my boy, have shown this family what it means to love without reservation.
Years passed. Peter graduated from Xavier's school not just with a degree in biochemistry, but with a family that would last a lifetime. He went on to college, Empire State University, but he never left the X-Men. How could he? They were home. He was there when Bobby finally asked Kitty to marry him, and when their wedding was crashed by Magneto, who, despite his villainous reputation, just wanted to give them a present, a set of magnetic silverware that would never get lost. He was there when Kurt adopted a group of refugee mutant children, and when Logan finally admitted he was proud of the man Peter had become. He was there when Jean and Scott had their first child, and he was there when a new generation of young mutants arrived at the school, scared and alone and convinced they were monsters.
Let me tell you about the first time I met the X-Men. I thought I was a freak too.
Peter would say to these new students, sitting in the same spot where Xavier had once reassured him. The world changed around them. Mutant registration acts were defeated. Sentinels were decommissioned. That Xavier had always spoken of. Peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants slowly became reality. And at the center of it all was a young man who had learned that family wasn't about genetics or origin stories. It was about choosing to stand together, to fight for each other, to believe in each other, even when the world told you not to.
Any regrets?
Logan asked Peter one evening, as they sat on the mansion's roof watching the sunset. Peter was now in his 30s, still web-slinging, still teaching, still making terrible jokes at inappropriate moments.
Just one. I regret that it took a radioactive spider bite for me to find my real family.
Peter replied.
Could have been worse, kid. Could have been radioactive Wolverines.
Logan snorted.
Please don't give the universe any ideas.
Below them, the sounds of the school drifted up through the windows. Students laughing, teachers instructing. The quiet hum of a community that had learned to thrive despite being different.
Think they'll be okay? The next generation?
Logan asked. Peter smiled, watching a group of young mutants practice their abilities in the garden, their powers combining in ways that created something beautiful rather than destructive.
They'll be better than okay. They'll be amazing.
How can you be sure?
Because they're not just mutants or humans or spider people. They're all of us. And all of us together, that's something pretty spectacular.
In the distance, a shooting star crossed the darkening sky. Or maybe it was just Peter's old friend Harry, testing out his new goblin tech. With Peter's life, it was sometimes hard to tell. But it didn't matter. Because whatever challenges tomorrow brought, Peter Parker knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had his web shooters. He had his spider sense. He had his terrible jokes and his unshakable optimism. But most importantly, he had his family. The X-Men. The people who had taught him that being different wasn't something to hide from. It was something to celebrate. And in a world that often felt divided, that lesson was the most powerful superpower of all. The friendly neighborhood Spider-Man had found his true home. Not in Queens, not in New York City, but in the hearts of the people who understood that with great power comes great responsibility, and with great love comes great strength. This was Peter Parker's web, and it was beautiful. The web slinger who could have been an Avenger became something better, an X-Man, a teacher, a bridge between two worlds. And the lesson was simple. Sometimes, the best way to find your place in the world is to help others find theirs first. The spider who joined the outcasts didn't just find acceptance. He helped create a world where no one had to choose between being different and being loved. This was Peter's greatest responsibility. Please subscribe for more what-if theories as we are just getting started.